I didn't leave the note they called me from the school. Not because I was scared. I'd been scared before, plenty of times, but because I already knew, somewhere deep in my chest, that what was coming was bigger than I had words for yet. I'm 64 years old. I live in a small house in Sudbury, Ontario, the same house I've lived in for 31 years, the one with the green shutters my husband painted the summer before he passed. I want to tell you what happened to my grandson, and I want to tell you what happened to me. My daughter? I'll call her by what she is. My daughter was 23 when she had him. His name is Callum. He came into the world in October, a cold snap already settling over northern Ontario, frost on the hospital windows. I remember holding him in that delivery room and thinking he looked like he was listening, not crying the way newborns cry, just listening. Eyes not quite focused yet, but his head tilted slightly, like he was trying to make sense of the room. His mother's name is Renee. She's my only child, and I spent a lot of years not understanding her. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Renee was restless in a way I never was. She left Sudbury at 19, moved to Toronto, then Halifax, then back to Toronto. She worked in bars and then in offices and then in bars again. When she got pregnant, she told me over the phone, and her voice had that flat quality it got when she'd already made up her mind about something, but wasn't sure I'd agree. She kept him for 3 years. I want to be fair about that. 3 years she tried, but Callum was different, and she didn't have the patience to learn what different meant. He didn't point at things the way babies point. He didn't follow her finger when she showed him the window, the bird, the sky. He stacked. He sorted. He lined up the measuring cups from my kitchen drawer in order of size over and over and screamed if you moved them. At 2, he could sort a deck of cards by suit and number. At 3, he still didn't call her mama. She called me in February of 2014. Callum was 3.5. She said, "I need you to take him for a bit." That was the word she used. A bit. I drove to Toronto the next morning. I found Callum sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, surrounded by bottle caps he'd collected from somewhere, arranging them in concentric circles. He didn't look up when I came in. Renee had 2 bags packed for him. 2 bags. For a bit. She hugged me at the door. She said she was tired. I believed her. I also believed she was not coming back for him. Not really, not the way a mother comes back. I could feel it in the hug, that particular looseness of someone letting go of something heavy. I loaded Callum and his 2 bags into my car. He sat in the back seat with a bottle cap in each hand, turning them over and over. I drove north on Highway 69, into the trees, into the cold. He didn't cry. I did. A little. Once we were far enough along that I thought he couldn't see my face in the mirror. The diagnosis came 8 months later. Autism spectrum disorder. Level 2. The developmental pediatrician in Sudbury was kind, an older woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she said the words slowly, like she was giving me time to catch each one. I nodded. I'd already spent months reading, already knew what she was going to say. Knowing didn't make it easier, but it made it clearer. And I have always done better with clear. Callum was not easy. I want to say that plainly because I don't believe in making things sound prettier than they were. He had meltdowns that lasted 2 hours, loud sounds, a car alarm, a smoke detector, the particular scrape of a chair on linoleum sent him into a panic so complete it seemed to empty him out afterward, left him limp and exhausted on the floor. He ate 4 foods. 4. Peanut butter on white bread, plain rice, sliced cucumber with the skin removed, and for reasons I never fully understood, Cold pea soup straight from the can. I bought cases of it. I became that woman in Loblaws with 24 cans of pea soup in her cart every 2 weeks. I retired early from my job at the school board to be home with him. My pension wasn't large, but we managed. There's a simplicity that comes with necessity. You stop spending on things that don't matter because you need the energy for what does. He started to settle, slowly around age 5. Not because the autism went anywhere, but because I learned him. That's the only way I know how to say it. I learned how he thought. I learned that he needed 15 minutes of warning before any transition. I learned that if the house was going to be loud, I had to tell him first and give him his headphones. I learned that he communicated in patterns before he communicated in words. That a stack of 3 blue blocks on the kitchen table meant he was happy, 2 red meant he was overwhelmed, 1 yellow meant he needed me close but didn't want to be touched. He started talking more at 6. Short sentences first, then longer ones. He had a particular precision to his language that I loved. He never said kind of or sort of or I think maybe. He said exactly what he meant, or he said nothing. When he was 7, he told me, "The furnace makes a G-flat." Did you know that? I did not know that, but I went and looked it up and he was right. He was 9 when he found coding. I'd signed him up for a Saturday program at Science North. They had a beginner coding class for kids, mostly aimed at 10 to 12-year-olds, but the coordinator let me bring him early. He sat through the first session without saying a word. On the drive home, he stared out the window for 20 minutes, then said, "It's like the bottle caps, but the bottle caps can do things." I didn't fully understand what he meant. I do now. Within 6 months, he had outgrown the Saturday class. The instructor, a young man named Aaron, who had more patience than most people I've known, started sending him home with extra resources. Python tutorials, logic puzzles, a textbook on algorithms written for university students. Callum was 10 years old. He read the textbook cover to cover in a week and came to me with 7 specific questions written out by hand in his careful printing. I enrolled him in online courses. Khan Academy first, then Coursera. Then he found his own way to forums and communities I didn't fully understand. He started keeping notebooks. Not one notebook. Notebooks, plural. Stacked on his desk in chronological order, each one dated on the spine. By the time he was 12, there were 19 of them. Renee called occasionally. Christmas sometimes. His birthday not always. The calls were short, and I could hear in them that she didn't know what to say, which I understood. But understanding something doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Callum was polite when I handed him the phone. He answered her questions with accurate information. Yes, school is fine. Yes, I am eating well. Yes, I have a hobby, and then handed the phone back. He didn't ask about her after the calls. I watched his face carefully each time, and I never saw longing there, just data being processed. It broke my heart a little, how easy it was for him to put the phone down. He started building his app when he was 13. He didn't tell me what it was at first. He just sat at his desk for longer hours, the notebooks multiplying. I left cups of tea outside his door, and he drank them without comment, which I knew was his version of thank you. In January of the year he turned 14, he came downstairs and sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I want to show you something." He turned his laptop toward me. It was an accessibility app. He'd built it for people with sensory processing difficulties, a tool that let users map their own sensory triggers and build customized alert systems, transition timers, noise management tools, clean interface, logical architecture. He walked me through it in the careful, methodical way he explained everything. No filler words, no backtracking. I looked at my grandson's face while he talked. 14 years old. The same boy who used to arrange bottle caps on my kitchen floor. This is remarkable, I said. It needs more testing, he said. I want to present it at the Canadian Student Technology Challenge in April. He came third at regionals, then second at provincials. Then in June, standing in a conference room in Ottawa surrounded by students from across the country, he came first. He was 14 years old and he had the most focused, calm expression I had ever seen on a human face while they read his name out. I was in the back of the room. I cried, loudly enough that the woman next to me put her hand on my arm. After that, things moved quickly. Aaron, his old coding instructor, connected him with a tech incubator in Sudbury. They connected him with a firm in Toronto. By the time Callum was 15 and a half, he had a development contract. By 16, the app, he called a Clear Path, had been licensed to 3 school boards in Ontario and 1 in British Columbia. By the time he turned 17, ClearPath had been acquired. The number was $2.7 million Canadian. I found out from the lawyer who handled Callum's trust. His name was Robert, a quiet man from a firm in Sudbury, who'd helped me set up the structure when the licensing deal started. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon in November and said, "Mrs. Bouchard, the acquisition closed this morning." He read me the number. I sat down on my kitchen floor, not dramatically, just because my leg stopped working for a moment, and said, "I need a minute." Robert said, "Take all the time you need." I sat there for a while. Outside the window, the birch trees had lost their leaves. The sky was that particular flat gray you get in Sudbury in November, the kind that sits on everything like a held breath. Callum came home from school at 3:30. I had made pea soup, old habit, and he sat down and ate a bowl standing at the counter the way he always ate when he was thinking about something else. Then he looked at me and said, "Robert called you." "He did. Are you okay?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Are you?" He thought about it, genuinely thought, the way he always did, like he was running the question through something before he answered. Then he said, "Yes, I want to start the next one." Of course he did. Renee called 3 weeks later. I don't know how she heard. It could have been anyone, a cousin, a mutual acquaintance, something online. The acquisition had been quiet, but not invisible. She called on a Sunday evening, and her voice was different than it had been in years. Warmer, more present. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking about Callum a lot lately." "Have you?" "I want to reconnect. I think it's time." I didn't say anything. "I'm his mother," she said. "I have rights." There it was. I told her I'd have to speak with Callum. She said she understood. She said she was looking forward to it. When I hung up, I sat at the table for a long time. Callum was upstairs in his room. I could hear the particular silence of him working. No music, no movement, just the occasional click of the keyboard. I didn't go up that night. I needed to think. She came with a lawyer 6 weeks later. Not to my house, to Robert's office, which I suppose was strategic. Robert called me the morning of and said, "She's filed a claim. She's asserting a parental interest in Callum's trust assets, on the basis that she was his legal parent at the time of the first licensing agreement." Callum had been 15 when the first contract was signed, a minor. Her name was nowhere on anything, but apparently that was what the claim hinged on, that as his legal parent, not me, she had standing. Robert said, "I have to be honest with you. It's not a strong claim, but it's not nothing. Family law in Ontario is complicated, and there are provisions around parental rights and a minor's assets that could give her some room to work. I told Callum that night. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table the same way he'd sat across from me 3 years earlier to show me his app. I told him what Renee had filed and what Robert had said. I told him I was scared. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Has she met with Robert yet?" "Next Thursday." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Can I come?" I said yes. Thursday came gray and cold, a February morning in Sudbury with ice on every surface. We drove to Robert's office on Elm Street. Renee was already there when we arrived, sitting across the conference table with her lawyer, a man from Toronto I'd never seen before. Renee looked older. She looked polished. She was wearing a coat that cost more than my monthly pension, and when Callum walked in, she stood up and opened her arms. Callum stopped. He looked at her for a moment. That processing look, the one I knew so well. Then he sat down next to me. Renee sat back down. Something shifted in her expression. Just briefly. Her lawyer did most of the talking. He laid out the claim, the timeline, the provisions they were relying on. It was smooth and practiced, and I could feel Robert tensing slightly beside me. Then he paused for questions. I was about to speak, and then Callum said, "Can I ask something?" Everyone turned to look at him. He was 18 years old, sitting very straight in his chair, his hands flat on the table the way he sat when he was concentrating. "When was the last time you visited me?" he asked his mother. He wasn't angry. He sounded like he was gathering data. Renee looked at her lawyer. "That's not really. I have the dates," Callum said. He reached into the folder he'd brought and set a page on the table. "You visited on December 26th, 2016. You called on March 4th, 2018. You called on October 9th, 2019. That was my birthday. There were 4 other calls. I have records of all of them." The room was very quiet. "I built ClearPath because I needed it," he said. "My grandmother gave me the environment to build it. She drove me to every appointment. She attended every IEP meeting. She bought me the laptop I used for the first prototype. She learned my triggers before I knew the word for them." He paused. "I am not saying this because I'm angry. I'm saying it because it's accurate." Renee's lawyer said something about legal standing, not depending on physical presence. Callum looked at him and said, "I understand the legal argument. I'm not making a legal argument. I'm establishing the record." He set 3 more pages on the table. School attendance records, medical appointment logs, IEP documentation. Every page had my name on it as guardian. Every page had his mother's name absent. Robert leaned forward. He said quietly, "I think we should let my client's grandson finish." Callum looked at his mother, just looked at her. Not with hurt and not with anger, with something that was harder to name. "If you want a relationship with me," he said, "I'm open to that, but this," he gestured at the folder in front of her lawyer, "is not a relationship. I want you to understand the difference." Renee's lawyer requested a short recess. They withdrew the claim that afternoon. I didn't cry in the car on the way home. I made it as far as the kitchen, where Callum was already putting on the kettle, and then I sat down at the table and I cried for about 10 minutes. He put a cup of tea in front of me without saying anything, which is what he does when he knows words would be too much. After a while, I looked up and said, "You prepared all of that." "The night before," he said. "I couldn't sleep, so I organized it." I shook my head. "Your grandfather would have been so proud of you." He thought about that. Then he said, "I think he was proud of you." for staying. I looked at him. This boy I had not given birth to, this boy who sorted bottle caps on my kitchen floor, this boy who heard G-flat in the furnace and read algorithms at 10 and sat in a conference room in Ottawa at 14 with the calmest face I had ever seen. I wasn't staying, I said. I was just where I was supposed to be. He poured his own tea. He sat down across from me. Outside, the birch trees were bare against the sky, the same gray sky, the same Sudbury winter pressing against the windows. I'm starting the next one in April, he said. I wrapped both hands around my cup. Tell me about it, I said, and he did. I keep thinking about those bottle caps, the ones Callum used to arrange on my kitchen floor when he was 3 years old. Concentric circles, perfectly spaced, we'd done from scratch if anything was moved. I didn't understand them then. I thought they were a symptom of something I needed to manage. It took me years to understand they were the beginning of everything he would become. There's something I've learned, living the life I've lived, that I couldn't have put into words when I was young. The choices we make when things are hard. Not the big dramatic choices, but the small daily ones, the ones no one sees. Those are the ones that build a life. Every morning I got up and drove Callum to an appointment. Every evening I sat across from him and listened to him explain something I didn't fully understand. Every time I bought another case of pea soup because that's what he could eat. None of that felt significant in the moment. It just felt like Tuesday. But all those Tuesdays added up to something. Renee made choices too. I'm not angry at her anymore. And I want to say that plainly because I think anger would be too simple. She was young and she was overwhelmed and she left. And then, 14 years later, when something valuable existed, she came back for it. That's not a mystery. That's cause and effect. Straightforward as arithmetic. What you put in is connected to what you can honestly claim at the end. What strikes me most when I think about that day in Robert's office is not the documents Callum laid on the table, though I've thought about those a great deal. It's the way he spoke. No raised voice, no trembling, just precision. The same precision he brought to everything. The same quality that made him hear G-flat in a furnace at age 7 and read an algorithms textbook at 10. He had done something harder than building an app. He had looked at a situation designed to intimidate him and he had decided to understand it rather than fear it. That kind of clarity doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from years of being taught, quietly and consistently, that the world can be figured out if you're willing to look at it carefully enough. I think about what it takes to raise a child who can do that, not just the logistics, the appointments, the IEP meetings, the headphones and the transition warnings, and the 4 foods, but the slower work underneath all of it, the work of convincing a child that his way of seeing the world has value, that took persistence I didn't always feel. There were nights I was tired in a way that went past my body. There were mornings I wasn't sure I was doing it right. I kept going anyway, not because I was certain, but because he was certain, but because he was there and he needed someone to keep going. Callum starts his next project in April. He told me about it at the kitchen table, both of us with our tea, the birch trees bare outside the window. I listened to every word. I didn't understand all of it. I'm 64 years old, and there are limits to what I can follow. But I understood the shape of it. I understood that he is going to spend his life building things that help people, and that somewhere in the foundation of all of it are those bottle caps on my kitchen floor and a grandmother who decided to learn what they meant. That's the thing about staying. You don't always know what you're staying for. You find out later.